A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here, of course, and thank you, Graham, for your introduction. I will, of course, say a couple of words about the CMU, but I would like to start by taking a little bit of a step back and put this in the context of the priorities of the new Commission. You have seen that we are very determined to try to focus on the big things for Europe. We have identified, the President has identified 10 political priorities where his sense is that these are the issues where it makes sense that we work together at the European level. Conversely, that of course means that there are other matters which could more usefully be dealt with at the level of member states. Now, you may say you've heard it all before, the big on big things and the small on small things, but it's something that we genuinely believe is the right approach. And you saw maybe last week that we adopted a package on the energy union. We will continue with the digital single market a bit later this year. And now, of course, today we speak about the capital market union, which is directly linked to the very first priority of President Juncker, which is jobs, growth, competitiveness, and investment. Last year in November, we adopted the investment plan for Europe, which is all about mobilizing finance into infrastructure investment for Europe. But it's more than that. It's also if you wish, a shift in thinking by saying that, of course, we need to continue, or member states need to continue structural reforms. Member states need to, or certain member states need to continue fiscal consolidation, but we also want to get investment into this virtuous triangle because it's important. We know from other parts of the world that getting investment going is a direct way of also mobilizing or the creation of new jobs. And in the context of an investment plan, very important, it's not only about mobilizing finance, it's not only about finding the right infrastructure project, it's also very much a matter of making sure that we have the right regulatory environment. So if you have looked at the plan, you may remember that there is a kind of a third section which looks specifically at this issue about trying to remove regulatory and other barriers in the internal market. It's not only it's not only something that has to be done at the EU level, also very much a member state issue when it comes to bureaucracy, red tape, the time to get a certain permit, for example, but there's clearly also more that we need to do at a European level. And in that context, very important, the capital market union, trying to make sure that we remove and dismantle obstacles and barriers for the free flow of capital, and also increase and diversify the sources of finance for SMEs, but of course also for larger corporates in general. Now, some people then say, but why do you really need that? In Europe, we have a tradition of bank financing, especially at the current juncture with QE, where it's basically banks are really incentivized to lend to the real economy. Is that not enough? And I think our simple answer is no, it's not enough. Very, very clearly, and I want to be explicitly or very, very insisting on that point here. The capital market union is not to say that we don't need banks. Of course we need banks for traditional reasons. If nothing else, banks are extremely important for the finance of the European economy. They will remain very important. But we do think there is merit and value in looking at, as I said, not replacing bank finance by other things and other means, but rather diversifying the sources and getting more deeper and more liquid capital markets. Why we need this, I think we saw that a very easy example is what we saw during the financial crisis. If you have a system which is very dependent on one single source of financing, when things then got difficult, when the banking system got into difficulties, very quickly that also meant that the credit to the real economy was reduced very drastically. And obviously, if you have more source of financing, you have a bigger buffer before this happens. And I think there is an argument to be made that certain jurisdictions in the world have recovered quicker from the crisis, also, not exclusively of course, but also due to the fact that they had a more diversified source of financing. Now, what is CMU? You have, or many of you, or some of you, I hope, have read the Green Paper. You have seen that there will be an action plan coming up a bit later this year. And you still say, Paulina, what actually do you mean? What is this? This nice slogan, but what exactly does the Commission have in mind when you speak about the Capital Markets Union? And I'm going to try to respond to that question, but I will also do it by mentioning to you what the Capital Market Union is not. And in that context, the first point is that the Capital Market Union is not a direct or a kind of the mirror of the banking union. The Capital Market Union is, from the outset, conceived for the 28 member states, for the complete single market. It's also, contrasting to the banking union, less about institutional structures and more about the well-functioning of the market. Now, having said that, the banking union is obviously very linked to the capital markets union, because you cannot have well-functioning capital markets if you don't have a sound and stable underpinning in terms of well-functioning financial markets at large, and of course, in that context, the banks being particularly important. So there is a clear link between the two, the banking union being a condition for the capital market union, but they are not the same thing. The second point I want to make is that, let's not fool ourselves, the CMU is not a silver bullet that will solve all Europe's problem. If you ask, excuse me, notably third country investors, what's the, so to say, why are you sometimes reluctant in investing in Europe? What's come out first is usually the kind of still lack of confidence, a certain degree of macroeconomic uncertainty. So that is, of course, something which we need to continue to work on. Having said that, though, I think we are today at a kind of macroeconomic structure juncture where it's the right moment to look at issues around the better integration of capital markets. So from that point of view, yes, this is a midterm project. This is something which we will not be able to do overnight. It's not one thing, it's a bouquet, if you wish, of different measures, but it is still something which is kind of important in order to take Europe forward. I mentioned it earlier already. We have the European economy and European corporates are very dependent on bank financing. You've heard the figure many times, 75% in Europe versus 25% in the US, roughly. And it is, of course, something which is referred to also in the CMU Green Paper. Now, this is not to say that we think that the European markets should be exactly like the American. Of course, there are very big differences in terms of one country, only one currency, a central bank which has competencies and powers which are different from the European Central Bank, not even mentioning that we, of course, in a Europe of 28, don't have only one bank. But I still think, or we still think, that it's useful to look at how things function in other jurisdictions. And if you, for example, look at the issue of venture capital, there is no obvious reason why we have so underdeveloped venture capital market in Europe compared to, for example, the United States. So again, the message here is not to say that we need to, everything that other countries are doing is fantastic and everything we are doing is wrong, but rather to try to look at the rest of the world and see if there are best practices or ideas that we can pick up for Europe.